I know a lot of you have probably heard me explain what the Twisted Tales are over and over again, but I got a new batch of subscribers from that Warhammer 40k video. So for the newcomers to this channel, I shall explain once again what Disney's Twisted Tales are. Each of the Twisted Tales are a alternate timeline offshoots of a Disney film. This one, Set in Stone, is an offshoot of The Sword in the Stone. Most of the Twisted Tales are pretty bad, unfortunately. I think the worst one so far was What Once Was Mine. It was an offshoot of Tangled, which is especially unfortunate because Tangled is one of the better Disney films. There's been a few different authors writing Twisted Tales. I think most of them are written by Liz Broswell, and she is the worst ever. This one's written by Mari Malcusey. I think that this is the first book that Mari Malcusey wrote by herself that I've read. I had read Frozen, Polar Nights Cast into Darkness, which was co-written by Mari Malcusey and Jen Colonnetta, and I found that book to be very dishonorable. And then I read Go the Distance, which was a Twisted Tale offshoot of Hercules, and I found that one to be okay-ish, and that one was written just by Jen Colonnetta. So having read a dishonorable book that was co-written by Mari Malcusey and Jen Colonnetta, and an okay-ish book written by just Jen Colonnetta, I was under the impression that it was all Mari Malcusey's fault that Frozen, Polar Nights Cast into Darkness was so bad. But then I read Suddenly Super, which was another book just written by Jen Colonnetta, and that book was also very dishonorable. And then I read Set in Stone by just Mari Malcusey, and it was actually not bad. So I might have had her wrong this whole time. Perhaps I should have been much harder on Jen Colonnetta and considered Go the Distance to be a fluke. The question on the cover of the book is, what if Arthur wasn't supposed to be king? And you might be wondering, what does that even mean? At the end of Sword in the Stone, the animated film that this is an offshoot of, Arthur pulls the sword from the stone, proving that he's the true King of England, because only the true King of England is supposed to be able to do that. But in this book, it's explained that Madame Mim switched the Sword in the Stone with a fake Sword in the Stone, and let Arthur pull it out because she thought that he would be a terrible king. There's actually not a point in this book where they get the real Sword in the Stone back to see if Arthur could pull it out. So it's arguable that this question is a little bit inaccurate to what actually happens, but it's kind of more of a simplification, and it's more reflective of the themes where Arthur's actually questioning whether or not he should be king. And then there's another character who doesn't think he's supposed to be king. We'll get to that in a second. Now, Madame Mim, the villain, wanted Arthur to be king because she thought he would be a terrible king, and she likes chaos. However, Arthur turns out to be a bit better than she was expecting. There's even a nice part early on in the book where Arthur is settling disputes among the people, and there's these two ladies that are both claiming that this chicken belongs to them, and Arthur suggests that they cut the chicken in two and give each of the women the half of it, and one of them says, no, don't do it, she can have the whole chicken as long as she doesn't kill it, and then that's how Arthur decides who gets the chicken. It's the one who cared more and didn't want to get cut in half. I'm pretty sure that's based off a story from the Bible where a king is approached by these two women who each claim that a baby is theirs. So that was nice. And there's more stuff where characters have to come up with creative solutions, sort of like what the movie was talking about. In Sword in the Stone, Merlin was trying to tell Arthur to use his head. So to mess with Arthur, Madame Mim sends in her adopted daughter Guinevere, who quite obviously ends up being Arthur's love interest. Madame Mim had kidnapped Guinevere when she was a baby and told her a bunch of lies about Merlin being a villain who killed her parents, and lies about her saving Guinevere. So not only does Guinevere have a warped understanding of Merlin, she also thinks that Arthur is this oblivious puppet, and she kind of feels sorry for him because Guinevere is thinking that Arthur shouldn't be king, at least at first, and that he should be dethroned, but at the same time she doesn't hate him or want him to be killed. In the relationship that Guinevere has with Madame Mim is sort of a deeper version of the relationship that Rapunzel had with Madame Gothel in Tangled. I say deeper because in Tangled, Gothel didn't actually care about Rapunzel, but in this book, Madame Mim actually does care about Guinevere. So yes, Madame Mim is the villain, and yes, Guinevere has to realize that at some points, but there's more emotions that get mixed into that. Something that a few of the Twisted Tales have done is sideline the male protagonist from the movie. You might be wondering if this book does that with Arthur and Guinevere. It's more of a 50-50 split. In fact, the same author, Mari Malcusi, has a few other Twisted Tales coming up. One of them is based off of the animated anthropomorphic Robin Hood movie, and its what if question is, what if Maid Marian was the real outlaw? Or that's at least close to what the question is. And the other one is an offshoot of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and the question in that one is, what if Sally found the doors or something? What if Sally is something along the lines of what if Sally was the one to find the other doors leading to the other holiday lands? Now, when I read that, I of course assumed that the male characters that everybody loves would be shoved to the side. But after reading this, I'm given a sliver of hope that maybe it will be 50-50 splits, as it should be with the female characters and male characters, because no one really wants Jack and Robin Hood to be sidelined in those books. And not only does this book not sideline Arthur, it makes a point to have Arthur and Guinevere both save each other at various points, so it's not just one character being constantly helpless so that the other gender will look better. There was one point when Guinevere said that she's not a damsel in distress, which I kind of rolled my eyes at, but then it just sort of moved on from that pretty quickly. Now, even though I see that things were done as it should be in this book, I will say that it could be that the only reason Guinevere didn't overshadow Arthur in this book is because Guinevere wasn't even a character at all in Sword in the Stone, so it would have been weird for this character who wasn't there before to suddenly have all the attention. Maybe she does intend to have Maid Marian and Sally take up all the attention in future books, maybe. So now that we know that Arthur gets out of this okay, what about Merlin? In the first few chapters, you might be worried that we're not going to get enough Merlin out of it, because there's actually two things that Mim does early on that sets things off in a different direction. She replaces the Sword in the Stone with fake ones, and she traps Merlin in Bermuda, so he's absent for a lot of the book. Merlin does come back eventually when there's still a good chunk of the book left to go, and it does feel like there's a point for Merlin to be absent for so long. There's a lot of stuff in here that would have just been resolved too quickly if Merlin had been around. Didn't seem like she got rid of him because she didn't like him or anything. I think whether or not you will enjoy this book depends on whether or not you enjoyed Sword in the Stone. There's definitely some fan service in here, and it's echoes a lot of the sentiments from Sword in the Stone about using your heads to solve problems, keeps the magic system consistent for the most part, so it kind of feels like being back in that world. The only thing it was lacking in terms of the magic stuff was the personification of the household objects. What I mean is, there's this part in Sword in the Stone where a living sugar container is filling Merlin's cup with sugar non-stop, like the mops in Sorcerer's Apprentice. I don't really remember much stuff like that in this book. Well, at least I don't remember anything like that with the same level of comedy. There's a part in Set in Stone when a book reads itself, but it wasn't really funny or anything. But in terms of stuff like poofing away or transforming into animals, that stuff is still in here. There hasn't been that much Sword in the Stone content, so a lot of people might be clamoring to see Madame Mim again or see Arthur trying to adjust to being king. And there's definitely that in this book. So if you want a pseudo-sequel to Sword in the Stone, I would definitely suggest reading Set in Stone. If you didn't like Sword in the Stone, feeling like it took out all the epicness of King Arthur, you might not like this either. Something Arthur does really early on is suggest not going to war. Personally, I'm someone who enjoys Sword in the Stone but doesn't really obsess over it, doesn't really consider it one of the best. And that's kind of the level of enjoyment I got with Set in Stone. It's definitely one of the better Twisted Tales, however, that's not saying too much. I'm somewhat interested to see what Mari Malcusi does with her next two Twisted Tales. And that's something I didn't think I would be saying when I first went into this book. I'm sorry, I meant to say Mari Mancusi. I think I was saying Malcusi for some reason before. However, the last time I read a book that's focused on Sally from The Nightmare Before Christmas, that book was an abomination. If you haven't read Long Live the Pumpkin Queen, don't. It's so bad. Hopefully, Mari Mancusi sees Long Live the Pumpkin Queen as an example of what not to do. It knocked out Jack Skellington for most of the book. That's very bad and should not be repeated. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and do not repeat the mistakes of Long Live the Pumpkin Queen.